Good morning. Today we're going to be talking about the second Red Scare. If you remember the first Red Scare, it happened after Russia fell to communists following World War I. And so now, after World War II, we're going to deal with the second Red Scare. And there's several reasons why. Reason number one was the Soviet Union tested their atomic weapons in 1949 and showed that they now had those weapons as well. So we were no longer the only country to have the atomic weapon. They spied on us during World War II. They gained a lot of information that helped them catch up, and we were expecting to be the only atomic power for several more years. Another reason was China fell to communism. They were our ally during World War II. We felt like we knew there was a civil war going on, but we felt like the nationalists were going to win. And this just grew our fear that communism, it could happen anywhere. The largest country on earth had fallen in 1919, and then in 1949 or 50, right around the same time, that China fell to communism, the most populated country on earth. So the largest size-wise and the largest population-wise had become communists. So we felt like we were not immune to that. Mao Zedong is the communist leader of China. They called him Chairman Mao, and he's estimated to be responsible between 60 and 80 million of his own people's deaths. And so both of these things really scared the American people, and they became very afraid that communism was coming after America next. If you look on the map on the second slide, it shows you the countries around the world that have fallen to communism. Soviet Union, Mongolia, China, North Korea, and Eastern Europe. Okay, and it is going to continue to spread. We're going to try to stop it, but it's going to continue to spread. Back at home in the United States, one of the things Harry Truman did was there's a new cabinet or new group called the House Un-American Activities Committee, which was known as HUAC for short. But their job was to investigate claims of people being communist or fascist, and people who were anti-democracy, anti-U.S. government. Okay, and Truman passed a law that basically said if you're a communist, you couldn't work in the U.S. government. And HUAC was able to investigate all government employees. And if it's found that you had communist ties, you could be fired from your job. And they were unable to work for the U.S. government. One of the biggest things HUAC did was explore the film industry in Hollywood, television, and movies. This led to a bunch of wild accusations against other people, because basically what would happen is you would get questioned and they would say, we know you have communist ties. If you give us the names of others, then we'll go easier on you. And so people just started making claims, and it is going to eventually ruin people's careers. There were 10 people referred to as the Hollywood 10 who refused to answer the questions, and they didn't name names, and so they were blacklisted. Basically everyone in Hollywood, directors, actors, actresses, producers, all these people, basically other people in the film industry were told, look, if you work with these people, you're going to get into a lot of trouble. And so these people basically lost their careers because everyone else refused to work with them. Probably one of the most famous was Lucille Ball from I Love Lucy. I think she went to a communist meeting with her grandfather when she was a kid, and she got into a little bit of trouble for that. She was probably the most popular actress of the time, so it didn't damage her for very long, but it did slow down her career. Now, people's rights were ignored during all this. There was no factual evidence against a lot of these people. It was just hearsay, but if you remember during the first Red Scare, we weren't really concerned with the law. We were concerned with looking like we were fighting communism, and that's basically what was happening here. It made it look like the government and Truman were serious about fighting communism, because we found another communist, we're going to punish them. But they didn't really have any evidence besides someone else naming names. There were lots of different laws that were passed at the time, like the Smith Act and the McCarran Act, but I want to focus on some of the spy cases. There were three major spy cases during this time, and I'll talk a little bit about each one of those. Alger Hiss worked in the State Department, and he was accused of being a spy for the Soviets, and he was convicted, but again, without very much evidence. Basically, the evidence they had was a letter was found that had been typed that had confidential, secret information on it, and they traced it back to Alger Hiss's typewriter. And Hiss, that's basically the only evidence they had about him. This isn't like a computer where you have to have a password to get on and you can tell who's been on the computer. With a typewriter, it could be on my desk and you could use it and it'd be my typewriter, but there's no way to keep you off of it. So that's not really great evidence that he had done anything wrong. Richard Nixon was the attorney who had him convicted, again, without very much evidence. Hiss only got a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and he maintained until his death in like the 1990s that he was not a spy. So it looks like he didn't really do anything. The next one is of a scientist who worked on the Manhattan Project, building the bomb. And his name was Klaus Fauch. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, but I don't want to pronounce it the way I think it sounds. He did give secrets to the Soviet Union. He had already left America. He was in Britain when he was caught, and he was punished for being a spy in Britain. But he was, I think, a German scientist who worked for the U.S., who passed secrets to the Soviet Union. So he actually was a spy. And then there's Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. Julius Rosenberg worked in a government office in New York. He was a low-level guy, didn't have a lot of access to important information. Ethel's brother and Julius's brother-in-law was caught passing secrets to a Soviet spy. And so he was basically given the same deal. Hey, if you tell me some other spies, then we'll go easy on you. And he named his sister and sister's husband, both of whom denied it. And they're going to go to trial and be convicted, and they're both going to be sentenced to death. And this upset a lot of people because they thought, well, where's the evidence? Even if he was passing secrets, they weren't very important. Like, what are we doing here? But Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were both executed for being spies, again, with the only real evidence being someone said that they were spies. Okay, so things were kind of getting out of control. Out of all three of these, only one of them was a definite spy, and maybe Julius was, although he didn't pass on a whole lot of information. But his wife was a stay-at-home wife. She didn't have access to anything, and she was executed as well. So during all this time, when the law is being basically ignored, a senator from Wisconsin named Joseph McCarthy came forward, and he basically said, I know of 205 known communists working in the U.S. State Department. And so this was a big shock to people. That's a lot of people. You're not allowed to work in government if you're a communist. And so he basically carried around a briefcase and said, I have a list of names. And basically what he did was he scared people. And, when people are scared, they do things they wouldn't normally do. And, Truman denied all this, but McCarthy's going to get really famous really fast and become known as the top communist fighter in the country. He's eventually going to say, there's communists in the Senate and in universities, private businesses. He's even going to go after the Army eventually as well. And for a while, this is going to work out really, really well for him. Because basically, if he said you're a communist, he gets to wreck your career. And what would happen is these people would say, well, I'm not a communist, but I think, the guy in the cubicle next to me, he is a communist. And so they would stop focusing on me and go after this next guy. And they're able to weed out some communists through this, but they also go after a lot of other people. And it just opened up to wild accusations. So if I'm mad at you and you're my neighbor because your grass is greener than mine, I can tell somebody I think that you're a communist. He wears red a lot, so he must be a communist. And they'd open up an investigation. So it was, again, no real evidence, just a lot of, accusations for no real reason. Okay, and so he's going to go after his fellow senators, and in 1952 he goes after his fellow Republicans. And this is when people begin to turn on him, but things don't officially end until he goes after the U.S. Army. In 1954, this is right after the Korean War ended, he went after the U.S. Army, claimed that it was protecting communism. These are the people who were out there actually fighting and dying for communists. He takes people from television, he takes people from business, he takes people from the government, he puts them in front of a Senate committee, and he bullies them and scares them. And he tries that with military generals. They're not scared of him. And they go on the offensive and attack him and tear away his credibility, all on live television. And so he's going to kind of fade away, and people are going to forget about him. He actually is censured by the Senate and basically goes home and drinks himself to death. And he's dead within 3 or 4 years after all this. But the fear of communism is going to remain, but kind of the wild, crazy accusations and punishment with no evidence is going to fade away. All right, there's a cartoon on the last slide that I'd like you to look at and kind of think about what do you think that means? What is happening in that cartoon? What is the cartoonist trying to say? All right, and that'll be question number 1, is to look at this cartoon on the last page of these slides and tell me the point the artist is trying to make. All right, question number 2, let me get to it. All right, so question number 2 is, why was the fear of communism growing in the late 40s? What events happened that caused people to become afraid of communism? And who was Joseph McCarthy? This is question number 3. And what was his role in the Second Red Scare? All right, so you answer those and get me the answers, and you'll be good. Thank you.